Hey, it's Tony Wiggins with Locked On Jaguars. The team has gone shopping on the early day for negotiations. They got a wide receiver. They got a defensive tackle. They got a guard, and they got a bumper thumper at linebacker. I'll tell you about all of those guys here on the Monday edition of Locked On Jaguars, and we'll do it in just a second.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, good people? Busy day. It is a Monday, and we thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars. It's your team every day, and we're free on all platforms. We got big news coming from around the league. I first have to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline, because BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And I know y'all start here with me every single day on Locked On Jaguars. I'm Tony Wiggins. Well, the Jaguars are off to a good start in free agency, at least in terms of showing their aggression, at least in terms of getting names that you may know, names that you may not know. So let me give you that real quick before I give you my opinion on each one. The latest has the Jaguars getting Christian Kirk, a slot receiver from the Arizona Cardinals, who had a career year last year with over 70 catches for almost 900 yards. He's one of the guys that I pointed out in the build-up to the free agency in my mock that I have that I did last week. I did 4 straight days. And if you go back and you review those, Christian Kirk was one of those guys. Another one is Brandon Scherff, the Pro Bowl and even All-Pro guard coming from the Washington Commanders. I have to learn how to say that. Formerly the Washington football team. Brandon Scherff is expected to ink a huge deal with the Jaguars once they're able to start signing on Wednesday. Falonzo Fatukasi is a big run-stuffing nose tackle at 6'4", 315 pounds from the Jets. He's going to join the Jaguars with about $20 million guaranteed. And Foyesade Oluokun, I'm going to say it. I'm going to get it right. I sound like a guy from Coming to America who did not know how to say somebody's name, but they call him Foy. So we'll just go Foy Olu. How about that? A bumper thumper at Mike linebacker who really does fit what Mike Caldwell wants to do when you think about the way that he employed Devin White down in Tampa. So you got a guy who can run and fly and hit, who's big and physical, who can really flow to the ball, who's sudden and plays well in coverage to a line next to Miles Jack. You got another guy up front at 6'4", 315, who's a heck of a run stuffer, which frees up Devon Hamilton to do more of what I believe he does best at 325 pounds at 6'4", which is rush the passer and just be disruptive at sort of a 3 technique or defensive end, however you want to look at it. So what's going on now with the Jaguars is they've addressed certain positions and now can really look towards the draft outside of the first pick, because we all have an anticipation of what that is going to be. They can look forward into the draft into getting guys that can not only help you, but that can also really be sort of like baseball. Guys that are the best prospects that you can put in your system and develop. Look, I'm not off of the Trent Baalke is not good for the team train, okay? I still thought that it was an absolute horrid decision to bring him back, but they have a job to do. And if I'm going to sit here and just go back and forth thinking that they're going to be a bad team just because they kept Trent Baalke, then there's nothing really to be optimistic about. There's nothing really to talk about. There's nothing really to discuss. Or I can take the position that, okay, let me give them a shot and let's see what they come up with Doug Peterson, along with Trent Baalke, along with the new coaching staff, and maybe a new approach, because we always argue that insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result. Maybe some people have learned how to do it differently. I don't know. We'll see. But so far, in my opinion, so good. I know some people have questions about Brandon Scherff and his health. We can discuss that too at length. I know most people didn't know who the Mike linebacker and the defensive tackle were. They weren't on a lot of top 20 lists in terms of guys. Foy, the linebacker Foy Olu, he led the league in tackles. And when you watch tape, which is what scouts do, they watch tape. They don't necessarily look at highlights and the things that the general public does that makes these decisions. But Brandon Scherff is the big name that a lot of people wanted. If you notice what I did when I did my preview, I talked about the fact that they were going to address the offensive line, and they franchise tagged Cam Robinson. So that's two big physical guys. It makes sense now that you keep Cam because you knew you were going to get a Pro Bowl type upgrade at right guard. I don't think they're done in that area yet. So it answers the question. It starts to answer the question like, how did they really feel about the offensive line? How did Doug Peterson feel about the line? And did he believe and feel the same way that people have felt for the last few years that I didn't, that the line was adequate? For me, I don't think you need an adequate line. I think you need an above average to good, at least. If you can't get great, get close to it as possible. Don't just settle for being adequate at that position with a franchise quarterback. So they've addressed specifically the slot position with Christian Kirk, and Kirk can also go outside a little bit, but the slot is where you'll see his value because of his ability. He has a lot of speed. He has the ability to separate. At times he's had some concentration issues with dropping balls, but he immediately becomes the best wide receiver on this team. Now, I don't think they're done in that area either. But the one thing that I told you, they're going to have to get a bumper thumper. They're going to have to get a linebacker for a defensive coordinator who his background is linebacking. And that's exactly what they did by adding Foy Olu. I thought they needed to do something more on the defensive line. I thought they would do it in the draft. But because they've done this, they've really, really showed their hand. I think that they're going to go out and draft Aiden Hutchinson with the number 1 pick in the draft. And they won't look backwards. Now, if they do double down on the line, then that means they're going for the approach that they're going to make this team, they're going to make each unit the best possible unit that they could. And they're going to build this team one unit at a time. They believe they have their quarterback. I think they're going to come back to the offensive line. If not in free agency, they'll do it at some point in the draft. I think they're going to come back to wide receiver, if not in free agency, in the draft, or perhaps both. I think they'll add 3 players. I wouldn't be surprised if they go out and get Cedric Wilson and bring him in because he can play outside and in the slot. And then you start to see the unit as a whole get faster and give Trevor Lawrence more options. Folks, I think you need to arm that kid with as much talent as you can. So I don't care if they overshoot, overpay, or over procure players at those positions. The objective is to get him as much as possible for him to be as good as he can be. So what we're going to do in segment 2 here, we're going to discuss in depth what these additions mean, what else we can expect. And in segment 3, we're going to give them an attaboy. And what that means is the Jaguars said that they were going to be aggressive. And maybe they learned from last year, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you like Trent Baalke or not, what has happened or what seems to be going on here on the first day of the negotiation period is much different than something that you've seen in the past. So we'll talk about giving kudos and see if that brings the fans around. And in depth look at the guys that they have and what it means for the draft and the rest of free agency. And we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars after I tell you about Built Bar. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of those New Year's resolutions because they don't work. Sometimes I give up on them and sometimes I don't. The one thing I held on to, I just came off of vacation. I did not consume alcohol. Yeah, I didn't. And I also, regrettably, did not feel comfortable with the desserts. So guess what I had in my bag? I had Built Bars in my bag. I had Built Bars and Built Bar Puffs in my bag, and they were absolutely delicious. One thing, they didn't melt either. They didn't melt on a hot plane, probably because of the package and then the fact that they're just 100% real chocolate and real ingredients, and they're not waxy, they're not salt, they're not all soggy and chalky. They're actually extremely, extremely delicious. They're low calorie, high protein, and replace your candy bars and your snacks with ease because they are better. And typically, they have all the macros that you're looking for in a snack that your candy bars and the alternatives don't. So I'm calling those candy bars alternatives. I'm not calling built bars alternatives. Built bars are necessities. And you can get yours at built.com by using the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order of Built Bars. Make sure you're not late to the party, man. Get Built Bars, get those salted caramels or those Built Bar Puffs. And we'd like to thank you for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars and making us your first listen every day because it's your team every day. Check out NFL YouTube, the Locked On NFL YouTube page. Yours truly will be on there Wednesday with James Rapine. Every single day, different hosts from around the NFL. They give you the stories from around the league. They're going to be chocked and jacked up with all of this free agency stuff. So make sure you follow the Locked On NFL podcast wherever you get your podcast. Like and subscribe that also. Brandon Scherff, first guy on the board for your Jacksonville Jaguars. And I did say that I thought it would either be him, Lakin Tomlinson, or Alex Kappa. The Jags went further. The Jags went and got the guy that most people consider the best interior lineman on the board. I don't have the full contract, but it's an extremely aggressive move. It's someone that Doug Peterson knows up front, close and personal, because he coached against him in the NFC East for a number of years, and I'm sure Doug had a lot to do with that. But one thing this does is show up the right side of the Jaguars' offensive line more than it's been in the past, and rightfully so. The Jaguars fans have known that has been a problem for a long time since Brandon Linder was moved to center. They've been trying with AJ Cann to get the right side of that line. Ben Barch, whenever AJ Cann was out, and it just has not worked. So they said, we can't draft and develop. You know what we're going to do? We're going to run this and go get Brandon Scherff. There was also some talk that they were interested in Lyle Collins, and I would think Lyle Collins, if they brought him in, would be an addition at left guard. So keep your eye on that because the Cowboys have made Lyle Collins available for a trade. Also, if he hasn't signed anywhere else, I don't think he has. But Scherff was the first one off the board. He was the biggest name for the Jags that showed that they were right when they said they were going to be aggressive, and they have actually lived up to it. So I'm sure a lot of people will be happy about getting Trevor Lawrence some more protection. There's a little bit of concern about his durability, but as my friend Mia O'Brien has tweeted me, and she told me, even though he missed 15 games over the last 3 years, he was a Pro Bowl selection every one of those years. Pro Bowl can be a little bit about name recognition, but he was an All-Pro one of those years as well. So whenever you're an All-Pro, now I will temper that with this. Andrew Norwell, who the Jaguars signed a few years back as a left guard, who they're not going to retain this year, was also an All-Pro, and he wasn't worth it. So always weary of whenever teams let go of guys. Carolina always seemed to have guards that were very good players who could replace him. And I think Washington, the Commanders, because they have so many needs in other places, particularly quarterback, just felt like they could replace Brandon Scherff, and they allowed him to hit the free agent market. Foy Olu, as we're going to call him. I had to go and watch tape. I'm not going to lie to you. He may have been the reason the Falcons did not keep Devondre Campbell 2 years ago. Campbell's another guy who's a free agent, but because he played last year and was an All-Pro with the Packers. Maybe the reason they let him go was because they had Foy Olu, and they really wanted to keep him in Atlanta. The last I had heard 2 days ago was that they were hoping to re-sign him, even though they didn't put a tag on him, that they were hoping to work a deal out with him. Well, he hits the market, and he gets 3 years at $45 million. It could go upwards to 46.5. So he hits the jackpot right out of the gate with the Jags. Now, what I see in him at 6'2", I guess it goes like 235 or so. He's a good coverage linebacker. He had some interceptions. But the thing that I like about him is when you watch him play, he reminds you of the way the Tampa linebackers play, meaning seek, destroy, navigate through traffic, understand where the spill is, understand how to don't get fooled by the counter. These guys move and pull over here. He doesn't follow it. He goes right to where those guys left. and bang, fills a hole, and he flows to the ball, moves sideline to sideline. He's quick, he's sudden, and he's not one of those linebackers. I like Devondre Campbell, and I don't know if I mentioned him last week as a prospect. I think I probably talked about guys like Christian Harris, Chad Muma, the guys that I feel are the same coming out of the draft. I think what he is there's a difference between a chase and grab linebacker, which Campbell is kind of that guy. He gets there quick, he's sudden, he's long, he's rangy. Foy is a hit across the bow, and all of my Mike linebackers, the guys that know that have played that position, and even the running backs, the guys that have had to deal with them, they know what that means. When I say a bumper thumper, and I know that's what he does. He runs, finds a spot. The reason why he doesn't have to reach and grab is because he's there. And when you're there and you're sudden, you're allowed to get that head across the bow, drive that shoulder in. And what that does is that keeps the running back on 2nd and 4 from getting that little body lean that makes it 3rd and 1. If you make contact with him at 1 yard, he goes backwards. So getting your head across the bow is extremely important. And the only way you can do that is if you diagnose it quickly and you're there and you're on the spot and you're able to square your shoulders up and keep that running back at bay. Usually the guys that chase and grab, they kind of get there, they make the tackle, they get pulled up, in the opposite direction for a yard or a yard and a half. And, it's a shorter down and distance situation. I like the sudden guy, the hit across the bow guy. And that's what the Jaguars have had now. Guys been in the league for 5 years. The trend is to get guys that are 26, 27 years old. And I like it. I knew the Jaguars were going to get big and physical on that defensive line and add another player. Now, some people thought that they weren't going to do that because they traded last year. They got Brown to come in last year, the former Texas Longhorn, to come in and play next to Devon Hamilton. You may see those three. You may see all three of those 315, 320-pound guys. Malcolm Brown, you may see Malcolm Brown. You may see Malcolm Brown and Devon Hamilton might line up at ends, and Fatusaka might line up at nose tackle. And then they'll use the Sam linebacker, who in this case is probably going to be Josh Allen. And if they draft Aiden Hutchinson would be your primary pass rusher. You notice a big physical change in the way the defense is going to look with the two guys in the middle that can run like the wind. So look for a lot of 3-4 principles that sort of looks like that'll look a little bit more like a 3-2-5 look, or sometimes not even, I'm sorry, a 4-2-5 look. It'll look that way. I wouldn't even be surprised if you see 4 down linemen a lot of times in the Jaguars nickel package like you saw last year. How does it affect? How do all of these additions affect the draft, what is left in free agency, and the fans and how the fans feel about it? I'll tell you all of that stuff here in just a second on Locked On Jaguars after I tell you about BetOnline, because it's that time of year. It's that time of year again, and college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. That's right. Every single day. You're going to get this stuff during the week. You can go to a sports bar if you can get off on lunch and check out all the action. And the action is more fun when you actually have a ticket or something to wager from BetOnline. From all the latest odds, contests, player props, BetOnline is the number one. BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. You guys start here with me every day, making Locked On Jaguars your first listen of the day, and we really, really appreciate that. Reminding you that we are free on all platforms. Short and quick, third and final segment, because I got to get back to it, and I think the Jaguars might be ready to sign somebody else the way it's going. The Jaguars might sign 10 players on the first day, or at least agree to 10 players in free agency. So here we go. How do the fans feel? How will the fans feel about this? They will at least feel like you're trying. And the one thing I can tell the Jaguars fan base is, whether we agree with the fact that they kept Trent Baalke or not, they are fulfilling a promise that they're going to be very aggressive and get names on lists. So we have to, at the very least, give them credit for doing things a little bit differently, going after names, spending the money. This is something that he did not do last year. And it really, really angered the fans because you had all of that cap space, and what you ended up with is a guy from college trying to recruit people when what you needed to do is just be a guy from college who wanted to pay people, because that's the name of the game in the National Football League. So what's left for them to do in free agency? Wide receiver, more offensive linemen, maybe a corner. They're not going to get everything in one go. They're not going to get everything in one day. They're not going to get everything in one free agency period. They're not going to get everything in one off season, including the draft. They just won't be able to do it. But they can fortify this roster and get some top flight guys. Remember last week I said that I want the Jaguars to have somebody at their position that's considered one of the 10 best players at that position. They now have two of those guys on the offensive line in Brandon Linder and Brandon and Brandon. I didn't think about that. That sounds like a law firm, but Brandon Linder and Brandon Scherff. Both of those guys are considered in the upper third and maybe even higher, probably upper 25% of guys in the league at their respective positions. So kudos to them for that. I don't think they're done. I think they could fortify the wide receiver position as a unit. I'm hearing that the Allen Robinson stuff is hot. So if they get A-Rob to go along with Christian Kirk, with what's still on the roster, they can still invest in a young receiver, someone that they could develop. This is a deep draft in terms of tight ends, and it's a deep draft in terms of wide receivers. I expect at some point the Jaguars to get a big physical running back, because the two running backs that they have on the roster are both coming off of injuries, but they're both. James Robinson isn't big, but he does have a physical nature about it. I'm just talking about a guy who is a big goal line guy, a guy who really that you can almost think is automatic on short yards. And Travis Etienne runs physically, but both those guys are about 215. I'm talking about a guy who's a little bit bigger than that and gives a little bit of toughness late in games. But right now, I would say that you look at the draft and you see the areas in the draft that are deep, tight end, even though there may not be a first round type wide receiver, even though the Jaguars probably won't, unless they move back into somebody just called me Negro Damas. That's funny. But unless they move back into the first round, or they could sit atop the second round and maybe even get value in the third round. You can never have too many guys that can play the slot and too many guys that can hit home runs for you. I look for the Jaguars to probably start thinking about fortifying their depth at those spots so that they're never caught out there again with guys that can't play. But this really, if you start to get more guys that can start at these critical positions, it really allows you to go into the draft and look at the draft as just take the best player available, because we can't afford to not just do that and stockpile talent as we move forward into the future. All right, I'm going to remind you guys to make sure that you check out the Locked On NFL Draft, even more importantly now that you know who some of these guys are that are being picked in free agency. This gives you a better idea. Do your mocks now. Do your mocks now. And this is why I did that series last week, because last week when you do the mock free agency, it allows you to do a mock draft that makes sense. So now you guys get on all your sites and do your mocks now and see if they turn out just to be a little bit differently, and try to put that with what the Jags have done and what you think or anticipate that they're going to do. And look at the areas, look at the position groups, look at the strength of each group, and look at top 100 and 200 lists, and start to see where you think guys are going to fall in terms of where they'll be rated and ranked. But remember, just like the Jags signed two guys today you probably had never heard of, that's going to happen sometimes. I didn't mention two of those guys. I didn't mention Fatuzaki, and I didn't mention Foyalou, but I did mention those positions. So sometimes you can be right about the position and it still have the same effect. But it's just that because you're not a full-time scout and you're not thinking what the Jags are thinking, and a lot of these coaches have ties to people and they've seen these guys before. A lot of these scouts have books on guys that they've had. This is why I also tell people all the time, when you eval, even if it's not a position that you think you might need, you better do the evaluation, because it's that evaluation along with what a guy has done in his career track that's going to allow you to formulate that opinion as a scout. And that's exactly what they do. So do your mocks now and see what you come up with. Make sure you tune in to Locked On Jaguars, because we're your team every day for all the comprehensive news. I'll also be posting and putting out Locked On Nows, which are breaking news. So I've done one already. I'm going to do a few more as they continue to sign people. But let me know what you think. Keep hitting me up on social media, on Twitter at Shop Talking Wig. And I appreciate all you guys joining me as you do here every day on Locked On Jaguars. Until tomorrow or until later on, we'll see you here on Locked On Jaguars.